Horror movies have existed for as long as cinema has existed, and while we can look at the classics and remember them fondly, one less glanced at area are movies that exist in the public domain. A movie in the public domain is one that can be viewed for free. You don't have to pay the original author, you can download it or play it anywhere. And, most importantly, for the case of this video, you can resell them. Hiya, I'm Golden, and today I'll be taking a deep dive. A really deep dive. What I've got is a big movie box set, Mill Creek's 50 Horror Classics Anniversary Edition. Mouthful of a title. It's full of public domain movies, and I'll be going through them all for this video series. Now, just because a film is in the public domain doesn't mean it's bad. It could be a case of the proper copyright credentials not being assigned, or just the copyright lapsing. Many movies fall into the public domain for a reason, but that's the exercise here. To find some hidden gems. So sit back, relax, and I'll dig through this pile of coal to find some real diamonds. Or flawed rubies, in some cases. Also, mild content warning, there's going to be some outdated views of racial stereotypes here. Certain depictions of race were considered okay at the time some of these movies were made, and that sucks. Also, I'm going to say the fuck word a lot, so be warned. One more content warning if you're someone who really cares about quality. The visuals of these movies are going to be all over the place. I'm pulling from a variety of sources. Some of these movies I'm ripping directly from the DVDs of the box set, others I'm finding online. But many of these films only exist in poor VHS rips, so prepare your eyes to be assaulted by low resolutions. Gonna be looking at these films in alphabetical order, so we can get a real smorgasbord of quality. We've got vampires, werewolves, zombies, daikaiju, weird melty-faced men, weird melty-faced skeletons, talking people in suits, talking plants. A whole variety of subgenres and theming. Let's go. I wasn't expecting to find genuine quality this early on, but hey, The Amazing Mr. X is pretty alright. The film follows a woman named Christine and her sister Janet who become enchanted by a mysterious self-proclaimed psychic, who's really a phony. It's a classic case of spooky gaslighting. The psychic takes advantage of them by using imagery of Christine's dead fiancé. It gets a little convoluted though, as it turns out that the dead fiancé was alive the whole time.
Since I'm believed dead, I could even kill a man. Nobody'd think of looking for me.
And he demands that the psychic continues to con his ex-wife for her fortune, though the psychic begins to have second thoughts about it. How exactly Christine doesn't notice the crappy audio quality of the record that's playing her ex-husband's voice, I don't know, but whatever, suspension of disbelief and all that. The strongest element of this film has to be the cinematography and lighting. Characters are often framed as soft silhouettes with even softer lighting. The vistas are picturesque. The blocking of actors feels very purposeful within the context of scenes. They didn't just flatly shoot the actors like a cheap stage play like in movies we'll see later in this video. It's got that old-timey pacing you'd expect from a dialogue-heavy horror film, and many moments read as unintentionally corny. But if you can acclimate your tastes, you'll find a classy flick with excellent visuals. Decent movie. I'd say it's worth checking out.
If any husband of mine ever chased me into the ocean in the middle of the night, I'd shoot him.
The Ape inexplicably stars horror legend Boris Karloff as a scientist trying to find a cure for polio, specifically for a girl in a wheelchair he has a friendship with.
It's working. The child will walk again.
Meanwhile, a man in a shitty gorilla suit, I mean a definitely real gorilla, has escaped from a local circus and is killing people. After an altercation in Karloff's lab, the gorilla starts running around taking people's spinal fluid. Yeah, I wonder what happened there. The gorilla suit they use is so unconvincing that it couldn't be anything but a fake gorilla in the context of the story, and even then, the gorilla is supposed to be real for the first half of the movie before Karloff starts running around dressed up as it. Karloff does a good job playing the soft-spoken scientist. He's always a class act, even in lesser movies.
Am I gonna die?
We all have to die sometime.
But he can't do much to elevate this stinker. The cinematography issue I talked about during the Mr. X segment is present here. It's shot like a stage play, as many B-movies were, and it's visually uninteresting as a result. The movie is tonally dry in a way that doesn't excite like I thought it would. I mean, come on, it's about Boris Karloff running around in an ape suit killing people. I thought it'd be more fun than this. The movie even lacks the mystery element because we already know Karloff is the ape, but so much of the film is spent focusing on boring characters trying to figure that out.
Do apes ever return to the scene of the crime? They're noted for it.
Barely scraping past an hour, it's not one of the worst movies on the list, but there were better ways I could have spent that hour. The sacrifices scientists had to make before finding the cure for polio. Dressing up as gorillas and stealing spinal fluid. It's just tragic. Atom Age Vampire, made after the Atomic Age by releasing in the 60s, and also doesn't feature any vampires, is an English-dubbed version of an Italian movie named Sedocule. It's about a woman who is disfigured in a car accident. Allegedly.
She's disfigured forever.
It depends on the lighting. The transfer of the movie is so bad that early on you can't even tell if she has scars in some shots. Anyways, she's given a special serum, her face is cured, and she inexplicably falls in love with her doctor. Unfortunately, the serum doesn't last very long, so the doctor has to resort to killing other women to keep the serum active. So, right out of left field, he injects himself with a modified form of the serum, and this gives him a melty face and monster claws, and he goes on a killing spree.
Playing hide and seek?
It's basically a less good Eyes Without a Face, with a shitty monster thrown in there. It's got some atmospheric visuals at points, something the shitty transfer doesn't do justice, but this movie isn't much to write home about. The dubbing is poor, the editing can be pretty shoddy. Especially considering that they probably cut out a lot of footage for this version of the movie. It's a very standard mad scientist turned monster on the loose story, not a lot to talk about here. I was on the verge of sleep for most of this one. Thoroughly unremarkable. On to the next one.
Sasha, the time. You must do. I'm living, Sasha.
With a title like Attack of the Giant Leeches, I picture a schlocky Atomic Age adventure about giant leeches. And while the movie does have that, you unfortunately have to suffer through what this film considers people.
You're my wife. I'll touch you anytime I feel like it.
The film opens pretty strongly. There's a cold open where a guy encounters the leeches for the first time, before the title card. You know, this introduces intrigue, suspense, and the movie tries to maintain this throughout with its slow pacing, but it kinda sucks. From there, the movie splinters into two storylines, one where a stone-faced action man and woman investigate the leeches, and one of the greasiest couples ever gets involved in some shite melodrama that ultimately ends with leech death. For a movie that's barely over an hour, it easily feels an extra 30 or so minutes longer. It keeps stopping for these needless tangents and scenes that don't add anything.
Do you want some coffee?
It doesn't help that this movie is dark as hell. Not tonally, but visually. The night scenes are so murky that it's hard to read some scenes, even in the higher quality resolutions that I've seen. I get not wanting to show too much of the monster, because, you know, sometimes less is more in terms of building tension, but every scene outside at night or dusk looks like this. I will say, though, this movie achieves the ambiance of a thick, murky swamp. The sound design on these outside scenes works well enough. That said, I don't think there should be howler monkeys in the deep American South.
You know, I never thought that of old Dave.
Maybe it's the leeches. And yeah, when the giant leeches actually show up, they look alright. They look pretty cool, actually. There are things in this movie that almost work. The music has that cool 50s theremin sound. But man, it just can't hold my attention for the final 30 minutes. Scenes feel so stretched out, there's probably a better 40-minute movie within this 62-minute one. It's so boring. It's the cinematic equivalent of having a headache on an overcast day, if that makes any sense.
Someday I'm gonna give that she-cat a whopping she's been asking for.
The Bat is a 1959 horror mystery about a conflict revolving around an enigmatic serial killer, the Bat, who invades a country house occupied by guests. The dialogue and character banter is the film's strongest element. It's got a pretty snappy screenplay and it leads to some hilarious interactions.
If you can find another body instead of Sam's, it's all right with me.
We've got to get out of here. Out the back way.
We will. As soon as I provide that body we were talking about.
That said, the banter doesn't end. There's too much of it, and a consequence of this is that it doesn't leave much room for tension. For a supposed horror film, it's not very scary. The film never breaks its stage play cinematography either, so even the titular Bat is just there. He's shot from either a wide or a close medium. He just looks like a guy. The lighting is there, but the camera work is so static and bland. Very non-threatening villainous presence. The performances are generally good though. I love seeing Vincent Price in anything, but yeah, it's a decent movie. Doesn't blow me away or anything, but it's alright. It's Clue for boomers. The Beast of Yucca Flats is a unique kind of bad. The kind of bad where almost every aspect of the filmmaking process was done incorrectly.
The beast, finding his victim gone, unleashes his fury.
And as a result, I think it holds the candle as one of, if not the worst movie of all time. It's about a Russian scientist named Joseph Dvorsky,
Noted scientist.
who is mutated after stumbling into the Yucca Flats nuclear testing center, and, he gets bacon on his face. He finds a young couple and takes the woman. Then 2 policemen try to rescue her, but find out she's dead. Then 2 kids go missing, and the rest of the movie crashes from one loosely connected plot point to the next, if you feel charitable enough to call these plot points and not procedurally generated NPC events. The entire thing was shot without sound, which is actually a fairly common technique in filmmaking, especially at the time. Most old Italian movies were shot like that and had audio added in post, which actually does wonders for Sergio Leone's work and gives it this unnatural edge. It sounds unrealistic, maybe a little piped in, especially when half the cast is speaking their own language and getting dubbed in later. But at the end of the day, the lack of filmed sound is planned in advance. Leone crafts a scene using the lack of sound as a stepping stone for creativity, letting the musical score, often done by Ennio Morricone, do the heavy lifting.
Now we start.
But Coleman Francis is no Sergio Leone.
A man runs, somebody shoots at him.
The film does not make clever use of its silent image, opting instead to loop the same music track over and over throughout the entire film, without consideration for timing or even context, and having all the actors speak their lines off camera so the obvious dubbing will be less obvious, even though it just draws more attention to the fact that they dubbed the entire thing.
I can't find them.
The titular beast is just some guy, played by Tor Johnson, and he spends the entire movie stumbling around waving his arms in the air. There's this whole 10-minute sequence where a Korean War veteran chases after the dad of 2 missing kids, and it ultimately just adds nothing. It doesn't serve the plot at all. As a matter of fact, what is the plot of this movie? The entire thing is just people wandering around in the desert while some fucking psychopath rambles about flags on the moon and the wheels of progress.
Flag on the moon. How did it get there? Touch a button, things happen. Vacation time. People travel east, west, north or south. Nothing bothers some people. Not even flying saucers.
It's barely feature length, and that's the nicest thing I can say about it. It's mercifully short, clocking in at about 54 minutes. Awful in just about every aspect. The Beast of Yucca Flats is one of the worst movies I have ever seen. And I've seen fucking things.
See what we have here.
Black Dragons isn't really a horror movie. It straddles the line a bit, and it has more in common with a straight thriller. A bad one at that. It's a hastily constructed wartime movie starring Bela Lugosi as a foreign spy killing American government officials, and for the most part it's a pretty dull flick, but the twist at the end is so silly that it is worth noting. It's a crap movie, so I don't really feel bad about spoiling it. You can skip to the next section if you really care. Hell, a bunch of online sources already spoil it in the plot synopsis. But it's revealed that Lugosi's character is doing plastic surgery on Japanese guys to have them impersonate American officers. And keep in mind, this came out right after Pearl Harbor. Really laughable, but the rest of the flick isn't worth sitting through. Even the ending is comically abrupt. Bad acting, hokey dialogue.
I gather you're not frightened either.
A busy man has very little time to indulge in feminine emotions.
It reeks of a cheapo B-movie. Just some disposable low-budget feature made to fill time. Don't have much else to say about this one. Next.
All men are in danger of dying. The important question is when.
Ever read The Most Dangerous Game? Bloodlust, with a exclamation point for emphasis, is basically that. The plot follows a group of 20-somethings who travel to an island for fun only to find themselves trapped and hunted for sport by a reclusive yet sophisticated host with a knack for taxidermying rubber people.
The lust for blood.
Hey, he said it. It's an unabashed ripoff of Most Dangerous Game, but it's watchable. It's a worse version of something that already exists, but if you held me at gunpoint and forced me to watch it, I wouldn't have the worst time. Some shoddy filmmaking here, pretty sure they bumped the camera in this shot, but overall it's some mid-hokey garbo. You could do much worse. Sadly, Bluebeard is not a horror movie about a pirate, and even if the title character had a blue beard, then we wouldn't be able to see it because it's in black and white. But the movie's still okay. It stars John Carradine as a charming yet mysterious puppeteer who moonlights as an infamous serial killer known as Bluebeard. When a new woman catches his fancy, one who offers to make dresses for his puppets, he begins his standard operating procedure of disposing of his last girl to make room for the new one. Visually, the movie has 2 banger shots right at the get-go, but the rest is kind of flat-looking. But the set design is pretty consistently cool. I don't see a lot of John Carradine movies, but despite his inconsistent accent, he's actually pretty darn good in this, managing to play the character of Bluebeard as successfully suave and sinister. One thing that gets tiring very quickly is the film's score. It's rarely appropriate, playing high-energy music you'd expect to hear when characters are frolicking in the daisies, not casual or even serious exchanges.
A few weeks, and you think you'll come back to me again?
I think you'd better go now, Renee.
Oh, no, not this time.
There is never a quiet moment in Bluebeard. The soundtrack is overbearing and detracts from the overall picture. As a whole, though, it's a competently made feature that falls just short of being a minor classic.
I would let you turn against me too. Oh, no, not you, Lucille. Not you.
Let me die.
The brain that wouldn't die. A woman dies in a fatal car accident. Unfortunately, her fiancé is a brilliant brain surgeon, and he's able to keep her alive as a head on a table. Despite her pleas for death, he wants to keep her alive, and he immediately sets out to find her a new body, by going around and looking for suitable candidates in the sleaziest method possible. Unluckily for him, the head of his fiancée, named Jan, begins to develop telepathic powers and starts communicating with a monster in the closet. Yep, it's just as sudden in the film, too. Together they hatch a plan to stop her deranged husband from killing another woman in the name of science, while also killing his assistant because he was a prick. It's basically Eyes Without a Face, except it's a head without a body. And there's a shitty monster thrown in there.
I can see his hairline.
Oh yeah, it's the cap.
Got a little bandana.
Yeah, this is a bad movie, but it's definitely in the realm of so bad it's good.
Safe? From me?
It's trying to be taken seriously, but there's just so much about it that it turns into an unintentional comedy.
But with this serum, it began to breathe.
It's impossible.
Lady, you're a disembodied head. Nothing is impossible. The weird thing is, this movie could have worked. Even if you kept the monster and the telepathy, there could be a legitimately impactful movie here about grief and an unwillingness to let go of someone due to tragedy. But they fumbled the ball so hard here because none of these characters are likable. The fiancé character is a full-blown one-dimensional villain. He's not trying to save Jan because he loves her, but because of what it would mean in the name of science. The whole telepathy thing is completely baffling. It's a supernatural element out of nowhere in this movie that otherwise tries to quote-unquote ground itself in absurdist science. So what? If you lose your entire body, you gain heightened senses because all that's left of you is a head? It's fucking ridiculous and I love it. What I don't love is the film's pacing. There are several scenes towards the middle point or end of the film where Jan and her fiancé's assistant argue back and forth about the ethics of keeping her alive versus what it means to the world of science, and it goes on and on and on, and they keep making the same points. It's just so boring. The scenes where the husband is going around trying to pick up girls are a drag too. The fiancé is an irredeemable prick. Ridiculous dialogue, ridiculous execution of this premise. I highly recommend watching this movie with a group to riff on it. It's gloriously schlocky.
Very well.
Oh no! He's been defeated. I like that he had tape ready.
Like perfectly mouth-sized tape, like he's been eyeballing it.
Yeah, he just like had it in the corner whenever he needed it.
Carnival of Souls is Legitimately a great movie. Following a car accident, a woman named Mary travels to Salt Lake City, repeatedly losing her sense of reality while finding herself drawn to a run-down amusement park. It's really a movie you need to experience for yourself. Me describing everything that happens really doesn't do it justice. There's a running theme of disassociation and not feeling comfortable around other people, and it's wrapped in the aesthetics of surrealist horror, and it has this really great atmosphere. So many sequences in this film are genuinely haunting and uncomfortable. One or two moments actually activate my fight or flight response. That said, you really have to be in the right mood to enjoy this one, and what that mood is exactly is something I still have a hard time pinning down. The film can be too slow for its own good, and yeah, some of the acting is a little cartoony.
Oh, it was that man! That man!
But it took until this viewing for me to truly appreciate the elements of it that really worked. It's easy to see how something like this became a cult classic. Wait until the sky gets dark, turn off the lights, turn off your phone, and prepare yourself for one of the horror genre's most underrated minor classics. The Corpse Vanishes, another cheapo Bela Lugosi picture. Unrelated, but the only production note for this film on Wikipedia is that filming began on March 14th. Knowing this film released a couple months later, it really goes to show how fast these movies used to get pumped out. I'm stalling because I don't have a lot to say about it. The plot revolves around a series of mysterious wedding deaths related to orchids. It turns out they are not dying, and are in fact passing out so Lugosi can extract fluid so that he can keep his elderly wife young. Gotta be honest, this flick is so plotting I couldn't help but check out halfway through. At least Lugosi is actually trying here. It's painful seeing him in these poverty row productions knowing he's capable of so much more. But these were the only movies he could find work in, so he just had to roll with them. Next movie. Remember that one clip from the Malcolm in the Middle intro? Well, this is the movie it's from.
I love you till the day I die.
Creature from the Haunted Sea is a Roger Corman flick. This spy, espionage, comedy, monster movie follows a group of characters getting away on a boat with Cuban gold. And sometimes a monster appears. There's a guy who makes animal noises, and the main character is a massive simp for this lady who's very clearly not into him. This movie doesn't take itself very seriously. I mean, with a monster like that, of course not. But the pacing is horrendous, and the goofy humor wears out its welcome. Huge chore of a movie, but it has a couple funny bits. Roger Corman made a lot of shitty movies, but one thing he excelled at was finding work for up-and-coming artists, many of which we'll see later in this video. Creature from the Haunted Sea, however, does not feature many of these artists. Its legacy is primarily as a 2-second clip in the intro of a sitcom. Is what I would be saying if Robert Towne, who played the simp in this movie, didn't go on to write some banger movies, including the Academy Award-winning screenplay for Chinatown.
My cold got worse overnight, and now I sound like this. So you get to hear a different voice for a little change of pace. I mean, you should be lucky. You should feel lucky. This is nice. You get to hear my voice at a deeper pitch. Anyways, Dead Men Walk, our first vampire movie of the video, and gotta say, Producers Releasing Corporation is one of the most non-specific, generic company names I've ever seen. That's like naming your book company the Book Releasing Corporation. After becoming a threat to society, New Dracula is murdered by his doctor brother, so he comes back as a vampire to take revenge by sucking the life out of his niece. Apparently, the doctor can't do anything to stop this. Why not assign someone to look by her bed every night? Don't want to take any chances, right? Anyways, New Dracula sends his assistant to stir up some shit, and it ends in a big fiery climax where he becomes involved and starts play fighting with his bro as Fritz eats the corner of a column that fell on him.
Too much action. Let's just cut back.
Yeah, what is this editing is not doing too good.
Yeah, this is a pretty middling feature. It's a step above what Monogram was doing, but it still has that stench of mediocrity that doesn't make it worth watching. Bad acting from the supporting cast, New Dracula has no screen presence. It's just kinda lame.
Just a conga line of people in hats.
The boys are coming.
Another Roger Corman production, Dementia 13 is notable for being the directorial debut of Francis Ford Coppola. He made a little indie movie, you might have heard of it. It's called the Godfather Trilogy. Now, that was a big shock, seeing his name in the credits, being a director of some critically acclaimed stuff. I had some high hopes going into this movie, you know. to see where he started. Unfortunately, my best summary for Dementia 13 is that it's like Psycho if the plot was completely incomprehensible. The story is about a woman named Louise who travels to Ireland to meet her dead husband's family. The husband in question dies in the cold open after saying that if he dies before his mother, then Louise can't get any of the fortune. So Louise is going to Ireland to make sure they remain convinced that he's still alive and to coerce them into having the fortune go to her. Got it? Good, because it doesn't matter. This is a ripoff of Psycho, so she dies halfway through the movie. Like Psycho, the rest of the movie is about finding out who the killer is and what his damage is. And I would like to tell you what happens. I really would. I wish I could just read the Wikipedia page. But it would be disingenuous to imply that I knew what was going on here. There are echoes of the director Coppola would become, and there are some inventive shots here. And for being Charles Hannawalt's only cinematographer credit, he does a pretty darn good job here. But it's the screenplay, the moment-to-moment storytelling that really suffers. The script was allegedly written in 3 days, and for a story with so many intersecting story elements, it really could have used more time in the oven. It's pretty graphic for a movie of its time, sure, but it's not like it enhances the movie or anything. Dementia 13 is an interesting film for being the starting point of one of Hollywood's most prolific directors, but that's all it really is, an interesting footnote.
Oh, the movie ended, apparently.
Yeah, what the fuck was that?
Oh boy, another Monogram movie. This isn't the first in the video, but with the first being black dragons and the second being the corpse vanishes, I did not have high expectations going into this one. Instead of Bela Lugosi, they wrangled poor Boris Karloff into it. After the head of a shipping company is murdered.
What the fuck?
What got thrown?
Mr. Wong, a Chinese investigator, is called in to investigate. And... Oh no, that is not aged well. So yeah, Boris Karloff in Yellowface is asked to investigate the owner's death to prove that his son didn't do it. It's another Monogram film. A lot of people in suits talking. Outside of the horrendous Yellowface that makes Karloff look like a corpse, there isn't much to talk about here. There's some snappy dialogue, I guess, but the film is a plotting snooze fest of people in suits talking about things. Why is this in the horror movie collection? There aren't many things that make it a horror movie. Is it because Karloff is in it and he's adjacent to most horror movies? Is it because he's in Yellowface? Is the racism the scary part?
You know what I like about B movies from the 50s is that they usually had like some cheapo guy in a monster suit. Movies in the 40s, they had guys in suits and guys in suits and guys in suits talking to other guys in suits.
Even if a movie's garbage, if it has a little monster guy in it, it's like, oh, how fun.
The first silent movie of this video, and the first to be over 100 years old, Jesus Christ, everyone in this movie is dead. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of the earliest adaptations of Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Gotta say, they don't make cats like they used to anymore. I know this movie's, even by then, it was a period piece, but, you know, they need to bring these back. Dr. Jekyll, a philanthropist and scientist, is interested with separating the good and evil aspects of the human personality. As Jekyll is challenged by his peers and tempted by his immoral side, he manages to create a potion that literally separates his two personalities, his evil side being the horrible, deviant Mr. Hyde. Throughout the film, Jekyll allows Hyde to come out more and more often, and it ends with tragedy. It's a classic story that has been retold many times, and this film is novel for being one of the first cinematic retellings. With stellar sets and costume design, it's a pretty good movie for the era. There's this one real freaky scene where Mr. Hyde is represented as a big hairy spider that envelops Jekyll as he sleeps. Pretty good movie, but it's not a major classic like some of the later silent movies in this video. You should check it out regardless. Okay, so apparently the Mr. Wong character has existed in magazine publication for years, even before these movies, and Doomed to Die was an adaptation and a sequel to this film, which also unfortunately features Karloff in Yellowface. I know this may be shocking, real shocking, but I'm not interested in finishing this one. I've come to hate Monogram movies with a burning passion. Next movie, please. Finally, something more my speed. A giant monster movie. Not sure why it's on this horror box set. I'd categorize it more as science fiction, honestly. In a town with a guy who can't stop propping his leg up in uncomfortable positions, a giant mutated Gila monster keeps flicking cars off the side of the road with its tongue. As the body count rises, the police lurches into action, kinda trying to figure it out.
It isn't until the final 20 minutes when they find out there's a big lizard running around, and the leg guy bravely takes on the Gila monster with a bunch of nitroglycerin. Yeah, it's pretty dull as far as monster movies go. The Gila monster is barely in the movie, and most of it is two characters standing in a variety of locations talking about what may or may not be happening.
Okay, I'm gonna say it now. Like, this is definitive at this point. This guy is at least a little fruity.
When the Gila monster shows up, it's adorable, and the miniature sets they made for it are pretty cute too. But so much of the movie's runtime is spent on slow dialogue scenes. The giant Gila monster is a bit of a drag, but it's nice to see a monster movie for once. The Gorilla, not to be confused with the Ape, is a comedy vehicle for the Ritz brothers, a vaudeville comedy trio that I don't really know that well. The plot concerns a killer gorilla, who's introduced through a pretty funny montage at the start, who threatens the life of a rich man, played by Universal monster movie regular Lionel Atwill. He then calls upon three bumbling detectives, played by the Ritz brothers, to help protect him from the gorilla.
What's eating you?
Bela Lugosi plays a supporting role as the butler, where he does a pretty decent tongue-in-cheek performance playing off the brothers. He has a few funny moments of his own, too.
Now listen, you!
The whole Ritz brothers' bit gets tiring after a while. They don't have defined personalities like the Three Stooges. They're what the Stooges would be if every member was curly. Humor is really subjective, and this isn't really a comedy classic for a reason, but it is worth a look if it seems like something you'd like. Despite some of the annoying bits, I actually kind of like this one. Check it out. House on Haunted Hill is a film from director and producer William Castle, a man known for implementing cheap gimmicks into his movies. The gimmick for this movie was to have a skeleton fly around the theater. Since you can't really replicate that experience anymore, I'll do the best I can to bring it to a home viewing experience. The film follows a group of people staying the night at a haunted house, where they will be awarded money if they survive till morning. The game is being run by Frederick and Annabelle Lauren, and they both like to threaten each other in a jovial manner.
That isn't funny, Frederick.
Make a good headline. Playboy kills wife with champagne cork.
What I don't understand is why the contestants don't just stay in their rooms and wait the night out. It's not like their reward money is going to be split up, they'll all get $10,000 regardless. But because a movie needs to happen, they decide to be stupid and leave their rooms anyways. Nora especially just seems like out of her mind. Her reactions to everything are priceless. She's hysterical. The film has a playful energy to it. Vincent Price absolutely steals the show here. He's just in love with this script and he sells the macabre lines he's given.
There'll be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. I think everyone wonders what they would do if they saw a ghost. And now my wife has given us all the opportunity to find out.
It's a very imperfect movie, but it has a lot of entertainment value through often intentional means rather than unintentional ones. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, it knows what it is, and it just has fun with it. There are a couple spooky people roaming the halls, there's a sentient rope, an acid pit in the basement, and even a spooky, scary skeleton. What's not to love? Very fun movie. Hunchback of Notre Dame was an 1831 novel written by Victor Hugo, and in 1923 it saw its first full-blown Hollywood adaptation, though it's not the first definitive adaptation period. The film stars Lon Chaney Sr. as Quasimodo, a deformed man living in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Mocked and jeered by the people below, one day he is allowed to participate in the Festival of Fools, where he is further humiliated before being saved by a Romani woman named Esmeralda. They went all out for this production. The sets are absolutely outstanding, and the cast of extras seems to be in the hundreds. There's just so much to appreciate about the production design of this movie. Lon Chaney's performance as Quasimodo is incredible. He's able to convey so much visually about his character, and his character's introduction even showcases his acrobatic skill. It's an insanely physically demanding, kinetic performance, and he's so impressive, and it makes the ending all the more cruel. An extremely ambitious film for its time, Hunchback of Notre Dame is worth seeing. From one Lon Chaney family production to the next, and unfortunately it's not a fun transition. With a poster like this, you know Indestructible Man is going to be a doozy. Also, gonna be real, I spent most of this movie slightly intoxicated. Now witches. No witches? Is it an anti-witch establishment? Lon Chaney Jr. had it rough in his post-Universal years. Starring in cheapo productions made to turn a quick buck, and yeah, Indestructible Man is one of those movies. Chaney plays a death row inmate who is allowed to be experimented on after his execution. The experiment revives him, and he becomes an indestructible man. A narrator explains all this, and it's really unnecessary.
Towards the end of this case, Captain Lauder and I found out the doctor and his assistant had been murdered.
It's supposed to be reminiscent of film noir, but it's a hodgepodge of genres, and it doesn't quite work.
Pull off the armored car holdup. And then Lowe continued with his confession. He told us about
And then he continued to do the thing. Gotta say though, at least he's not the Yucca Flats narrator. He's actually speaking in complete sentences.
Touch a button, things happen.
Even if he is explaining things that can be inferred from just watching the movie.
Francine, I just thought of something. Yeah?
Eva agreed to let Francine do the show.
The stuff with the investigator feels weirdly disconnected from the Lon Chaney storyline. It's like they shot two different movies and tried to stitch them together halfway through production, using narration as a sort of awkward glue. Lon Chaney doesn't have any lines in this movie after his execution, so I gotta wonder if that's because he's supposed to be a mute monster, or because he's asked to be paid per line and they opted to just narrate his scenes. And they kept using the same two close-ups of him quivering in front of the camera in place of a reaction. It's really weird. It's a hastily constructed flick. It's like it's about to fall apart at the seams. What the hell happened here?
Okay, we need to go back, because the weird way they froze in front of each other. I need to see that again. Because it's like they've reached the end of their blocking and they just stop.
Also, what the fuck is that ending? The investigator basically just says, hey, I got you fired, so you can be my housewife, and it's treated like a good thing.
What did you do that for?
I figured that being my wife would take up all of your time.
Even if I wanted to say no, I couldn't. You're not supposed to say no to a detective.
I figured that, too.
Like, yeah, babe, I just took all of your agency from you. It's sadly very indicative of the time that this was considered a happy ending.
Why does no one in these movies have peripheral vision?
Because it was in 4x3. There wasn't enough room.
Invisible Ghost is another Monogram Lugosi movie. But, and this is a real shock, it's actually pretty good. Lugosi plays Mr. Kessler, who wants his wife to return to him. It turns out his wife is still alive, but is seemingly a little loopy after a car accident, and is being looked after by a man named Jules. Kessler's daughter is also engaged to a suitor named Ralph, who has a history with the house's maid. One night, Kessler sees his wife out the window, and this puts him under a trance that leads him to the maid's bedroom, where he kills her. The rest of the movie follows the characters as they try to figure out who the killer is, and why Kessler is put under a spell that becomes less and less effective as he starts to be freed from it mid-crime. The movie introduces a lot right out of the gate, but I can't say it isn't interesting. Under the direction of Joseph H. Lewis instead of William Nye, who did the other Monogram movies, except for The Corpse Vanishes, we've actually got some more quality filmmaking here, with some spooky lighting and purposeful camera work. I especially like the use of sound. The scene of Kessler's first murder uses diegetic music in a way that's pretty unsettling.
Why, Mr. Kessler!
The scene where the butler finds Kessler's second victim has a notable lack of sound. The deafening white noise as the camera slowly trucks down is effectively creepy. This film shows a range to Lugosi's acting that I haven't seen since Dracula. He's able to quickly change between a charismatic and comforting host to a menacing killer. One thing that isn't clearly explained is how exactly the hypnosis happens.
It's kind of arbitrarily hand-waved as being connected to Mrs. Kessler, and the ending is lame as a result, but it's a surprisingly engaging film. I was hanging on every plot development because the film managed to hook me. It's proof that a low-budget monogram movie isn't always going to be a stinker. It's a proper thriller, one could say. Invisible Ghost is pretty good. I recommend it.
Who would do a thing like that?
The Killer Shrews, another creature feature. This film opens on a very similar narration to the giant Gila monster.
Shrew feeds only by the dark of the moon. He must eat his own body where no human ever goes, and no life is ever seen.
Because, surprise, it's from the same director, Ray Kellogg. What do you think his favorite cereal is? Anyways, it's about two guys who travel to an island house, where the rest of the film takes place. There are two sets, one is a living room and one is a hallway, and actually there's a basement, and it's where an experiment on shrews is being conducted, to increase their size for the betterment of science or something. Predictably, the shrews are very aggressive and start attacking the house. The black guy dies first, of course.
There are 200 or 300 giant shrews out there.
Yeah, and we won't see more than 4 or 5 per shot. Then a bunch of randomly generated shrew events start happening, and there's a lot of talking in rooms. A lot of talking in rooms. Eventually they hatch a very dumb but practical plan to escape the island. Yeah, this is another dull monster movie, but sometimes something amusing happens.
Creamy sugar.
I can't keep talking about this movie without discussing the elephant in the room. Or rather, the doggy in the rat costume. The killer shrews are so blatantly just dogs they've dressed up, and it adds a bunch of unintentional comedy when the supposedly ferocious hellbeasts are just chaotically sniffing the actors to death. There's this one horrible editing mistake. I don't know where else to include this in this discussion, but at some point the modern home video release of this film got completely fucked up for one scene. So it happens right after Mario here gets bitten by a shrew. There's a shot of the actors walking to the door of the basement to investigate, and then it cuts back. At some point between the MST3K episode and the most recent transfer, the sequence turned into this. For some reason, this mistake is present in the colorized version of the movie too. I don't know what happened here. The Killer Shrews is mostly boring and it has a handful of funny bits related to the dogs, but I would not recommend watching this by yourself. Find yourself a group of friends. If you don't have any friends, then kidnap some, and have fun.
An excellent example of overpopulation.
I'm not going to worry about overpopulation just yet.
King of the Zombies is a horror comedy that basically feels like a more comedic white zombie. It follows 3 guys who find themselves stuck in the middle of the jungle, and they meet a Bela Lugosi stand-in who has a colony of voodoo zombies. Anyways, I can't in full confidence say this whole movie's worth watching. There are some poorly aged bits. But the black guy of the trio, played by Manton Moreland, is genuinely very funny.
If I ain't no zombie, and there is, what am I doing here?
Hey, where you going?
There's just something about his delivery that makes him extremely likable.
Eyes, if you look, I ain't responsible for nothing you sees.
He undercuts any tension of the scene he's in, but that honestly just makes it funnier.
Move over, boys. I'm one of the gang now.
Funny-ass performance in a movie that's otherwise just fine.
I was digging in a graveyard. Can you imagine me digging in a graveyard?
What about the graveyard?
No, that couldn't have been me.
Go listen to some Manton Moreland party records. Genuinely funny guy. Before Will Smith in I Am Legend and Charlton Heston in The Omega Man, there was Vincent Price in The Last Man on Earth, the first adaptation of the 1954 novel I Am Legend, written by Richard Matheson. Set 3 years after an apocalyptic plague that infected the entire Earth's population, the lone immune survivor, Dr. Robert Morgan, spends his days preparing for night, and his nights fighting off the vampiric zombies that want him dead. We spend a lot of time with Morgan, seeing his daily routine and how he copes with the hopeless situation he is in, a large section of the movie taking place in a flashback just before the apocalypse.
I wish somebody would find a vaccine.
And the film eventually reveals there may be hope for him yet, if fleeting. This is one of Vincent Price's more vulnerable performances. The film spends a lot of time with him just going about his daily routine, which he approaches with haggardness. The vampiric zombies he faces are real spooky too. They sleep during the day, are repelled by garlic and mirrors, and can be dispatched by being staked through the heart, but they move in packs and shuffle around like zombies. It's a unique mix of mythos. What's more, they call out Morgan's name.
Morgan! We're going to kill you, Morgan!
While I think characterless threats can be scarier, having a whole pack of monsters single out one guy, some of whom being people he used to know, adds to the psychological torture he must be feeling, and makes the viewer sympathize with Morgan more. Normally, an internal monologue in one of these public domain movies is a bad sign, especially if it's trying to bridge the gap between unconnected scenes, but not only is the fact that it's narrated by Vincent Price friggin' awesome, but the information being delivered is more of a stream of consciousness that helps the viewer further connect with Morgan as a character. And of course he's not gonna speak all of this out loud.
This convertible would be nice. Probably handles well. But I can't think of comfort.
I don't have any problems with this movie. Most of them boil down to nitpicky stuff like cheesy ADR work.
You take care of your life, I'll take care of mine.
There's also an action set piece towards the end of the film that I don't think Vincent Price is physically built for, but that's spoiler territory, and this movie's just so good that it's worth seeing for yourself. Don't watch it with the Mill Creek transfer though. The frame is horribly cropped. This goes without saying for most of these films shot on a wider aspect ratio, but yeah, it's especially true for this one. The HD widescreen version is free and readily available. Hell, it's available on the Wikipedia page, so watch that version. This is an absolute must-watch public domain film. From the Last Man to the Last Woman. This Roger Corman-directed flick has a screenplay written by Robert Towne, who also stars as a simp for the titular Last Woman. Noticing a pattern here. This film was also released in color, so I'm going to be using that for this video. Also, gotta say, seeing a movie in color after all these black and white movies is like getting flashbanged. Or nuked. The film follows a couple and their lawyer. The wife is on shaky terms with her husband, and the lawyer, played by Robert Towne, starts appealing to her more. After a short scuba diving session, the three of them discover they might be the last people on Earth following a sudden incident they missed. The two remaining men then proceed to fight over the girl. There are some good script writing moments here. Having the film open on a cockfight, animal abuse aside, is a clever way of foreshadowing what's about to happen. And there is some decent banter here, but the film is really low energy and I wasn't in the mood for it. By no means a terrible movie, I wasn't terribly interested either.
Let's go home.
Another Roger Corman movie. The Little Shop of Horrors is a farcical black comedy. Seymour, a meek florist, discovers a weird Venus flytrap-looking plant and nicknames it Audrey Jr., named after the daughter of the flower shop owner he has a crush on. He discovers that it grows when fed blood, but with that growth comes a bigger appetite.
Feed me!
Eventually, Seymour starts feeding it human bodies, and the owner starts to get suspicious of his activities. But he's willing to turn a blind eye as long as it's making money. This film radiates goofball energy. It's a gag-a-minute comedy. The dialogue is often overlapping and snappy.
Ever see this man?
Man, see picture.
Why are you so nervous?
You got a guilty conscience?
No, why should I?
It's a cheap movie, but the production values and plotting feel slapped together in a way that adds to the comedy. It's hard to explain, but it works. There's this swagger to the way the characters speak, and it's very funny.
Feed me!
Take it easy, Dracula. What do you think I'm carrying here, my dirty laundry?
There are too many weird, funny moments and lines to count. There's famous B-movie actor Dick Miller, who, inexplicably, is a connoisseur of flowers.
They are all right. Well, I've had better.
There's the random scalpel fight in the dentist office. There's the dentist character himself, who's an absolute psycho.
Oh, you are going to get it!
There's even this great scene with a very young Jack Nicholson who plays a sadomasochist.
Oh my God, don't stop now!
Yet another example of Roger Corman giving work to artists who would go on to have very successful careers.
Here's Johnny!
For something allegedly slapped together in 5 days using pre-existing props and sets, it's a pretty damn good movie. Also, it would be foolish of me to not mention the musical and subsequent remake that was later released in 1986, directed by Frank Oz. The remake isn't in the public domain, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it is absolutely worth seeing.
Feed me, cowboy! Feed me now!
It's an update of the original story that feels similar enough in spirit, but is creative enough to have its own endearing identity.
Just because you put a strange and interesting plant in the window, people don't suddenly...
Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing that strange and interesting plant.
Great music, fantastic puppetry, it's an extremely fun movie. Both movies are worth seeing. Watch them back to back for the best experience.
You not only made a butcher out of me, but you drove my girl away.
Shut up and bring on the food!
It took this long to get to our first werewolf movie. It's very unfortunate it has to be another one of these Poverty Row movies from the 40s, though. So Revenge of the Mad Monster is about a mad scientist who succeeds in creating a serum that creates werewolves. He uses it on his dim-witted servant. I really hope the wolf in that cage isn't uncomfortable. Knowing the time period this film was produced, I don't trust these filmmakers with animal safety. Anyways, he plans to use the serum to create an army of super soldiers. It was the middle of World War II after all, but he's ridiculed and shunned by his peers. On subsequent nights, this man-wolf is allowed to wander the swamps and mess with the locals. If you've ever seen a Universal monster movie, it goes about as well as you'd expect. The man-wolf is chased around the swamp by an angry mob, the monster turns on his master, and it ends in a big fiery climax. It's got some things going for it. The man-wolf makeup looks okay. This guy just looks like he hasn't shaved in 5 years. I like the exterior scenes, they've got that spooky atmosphere to them. I like this lady.
You can't kill him nowhere, except with a silver bullet.
She's a funny little goblin caught on film. The movie's just mediocre. It's moderately engaging, it's writing on a lot of monster movie tropes of the era, and it doesn't do much to distinguish itself. Next movie. Maniac from 1934, however, does very well in distinguishing itself from other films of its era, in that it's one of the earliest cases of a film that is so bad, so baffling in so many ways, that it's good. The film follows a crazy man who happens to also work for a crazy scientist.
Have you made arrangements? No.
Who is obsessed with bringing the dead back to life. One day, the scientist sends him to come back with a fresh body, but he comes back empty-handed.
Where is it?
Buddy, where do you think he's hiding the entire human body you told him to get? In his pocket? Anyways, the scientist tells him to shoot himself so he can be revived, but the crazy man refuses and kills the scientist instead. Being an aspiring actor, he assumes the mad scientist's identity. Then, a number of things happen. He injects a man with crazy juice.
Creeping through my veins.
He pops a cat's eyeball out and eats it. I hope that cat was actually missing an eyeball. He puts the body of the mad scientist inside the walls. He hatches a scheme with this lady. There's gratuitous nudity. The story of this movie is nonsensical. It takes elements from Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, with the cat meowing giving away the body of the mad scientist at the end, but it's a very fleeting reference. Every actor brings something new to the table, a new brand of terrible performance.
I thought maybe, you might use them for, well, some experiments or something.
With lines like these, I don't blame them for having such a hard time.
She must have oxygen.
They even left in this close-up of a supposed corpse breathing. The film is randomly interrupted with these definitions of various psychosis. It even opens with a long foreword about mental health in the United States. While it is important that mental illnesses are something that should be properly examined, and the individuals afflicted given the sympathy and care they deserve, this film does not portray these illnesses with sympathy, instead opting for the sensationalist mad scientist stereotype, and having the crazy characters snorting like pigs. It's hypocritical, and the lack of awareness about the main point they were making elevates it to entertainment that it never intended. This movie is full of strange dialogue on top of terrible performances.
Once a ham, always a ham. You, an actor?
Maniac is a baffling movie, but because it's made with sincerity, it succeeds in being enjoyably terrible. It's the shortest movie of this video too, just 3 minutes shorter than Yucca Flats, so you can knock it out in less than an hour.
So, the rats eat the cat, the cats eat the rat,
and I get the skin.
Of all the films included on this collection, Fritz Lang's Metropolis is the most bizarre inclusion. It's a movie that went on to influence countless works in science fiction. I mean, C-3PO is basically a de-bimbofied version of the robot from this movie. Or is it the other way around?
This oil bath is going to feel so good.
Anyways, this work influenced a lot in the science fiction genre, not horror. This is not a horror movie. Why is it not in this science fiction box set? Its status as a public domain film is dubious now too. It was considered one at one point, but since it's erroneously here, I might as well look at it. Don't know any other time I could talk about it, and it deserves the attention. The film is set in a massive city separated by two classes, the workers in the underground and the rich elite who live above. The son of the head of the elite, Fritter, sees what life is like down below, and becomes sympathetic to the workers. And he falls in love with a woman from the depths named Maria. His father, Joe, catches wind of this, so he has a robot created by inventor Rotwang impersonate Maria, to sow seeds of distrust in the workers to justify an attack. Yet little does Joe know, Rotwang plans to use this fake Maria to incite violence on both the surface and the underground, as revenge. The visuals are as impressive as they are beautiful. Metropolis is a towering achievement in special effects and art design, heavily influenced by the German Expressionist movement, with its angled architecture that casts long, intersecting shadows. The themes of classism and use of biblical imagery can be a bit too on the nose. I mean, the film stops just so you get it, but goddamn, I can't not appreciate the work that went into conveying its ideas, all without sound too. It's a little more dialogue heavy than most silent films I've seen, but it is still able to communicate its ideas visually through its actors' exaggerated performances. For a long time, large chunks of this movie were considered lost, but it has since been fully restored. Gotta say, at nearly 2.5 hours, it does feel a little too long. In fact, the Mill Creek release contains a much shorter version, but this is a movie you need to see at least once in your life. Again, it's not public domain. Maybe, I'm still not so sure, but it can be easily viewed on YouTube and other places, if you know where to look. It's one of the most technically impressive films of the silent era. As far as I can tell from research, Monster from a Prehistoric Planet was never in the public domain, but it was thought to be, which is why it's on this box set. I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to talk about a kaiju movie though, so I'm going to review it anyways. It also gives me an excuse to not use the horrendous pan and scan of the movie that cuts off half the image. Monster from a Prehistoric Planet is the English dub of a Japanese film titled Gappa, the Triphibian Monster, released during the peak of Japan's kaiju boom. The same boom that brought us the Ultra series and Gamera. Boy, I can't wait to talk about Ultraman. Got so much to say about that series. I've seen nearly every show by now, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Monster from a Prehistoric Planet is a fucking bad name. These monsters technically are from the past, I mean by virtue of kind of being like dinosaurs, but they're not from another planet. I'll be using a higher quality transfer of the film, but just to make it harder on myself, I'll watch it with the dub.
Papa's mean. I don't like you anymore.
The helicopters are ready. They'll be here soon.
We're already here.
Okay, let's go.
An eccentric CEO, tell me if you've heard that one before, wants to take animals from a nearby island and bring them to Japan.
Right here. Here. Right here.
He sends a group of scientists to investigate the island, where they discover it's inhabited by a bunch of Japanese guys in brownface. I mean, native islanders. God damn it.
That's right, we're Japanese. How did you know?
Unfortunately, common thing in Showa-era kaiju films. During their expedition, they find a giant egg that has a baby Gappa inside it, which they bring back to Japan. Pretty wretched little creature.
G-A-P-P-A. Gappa.
With their baby taken from them, Gappa's parents are pissed off. As a matter of fact, they travel to Japan and go apeshit.
Maybe we did make a big mistake.
These kaiju attack scenes are the absolute highlight of the film. For being Nakatsu's only good kaiju production, they went all out on the production values for these scenes. With special effects directed by Toho movie veteran Akira Watanabe, these scenes are just as well executed as their contemporaries from rival studios. A couple pretty bad compositing shots, but the practical effects are on point, just peak tokusatsu. One bit of characterization from the monsters that I really like is that the parents don't get aggressive until the self-defense force makes them drop the octopus they were carrying. They were probably carrying it for their baby, you know, like for a snack. Even the other one's like, "Aw, shit, you've done it now." And that's when they start using their heat rays. Very similar effect to Godzilla's atomic breath, by the way. So the self-defense force brings in John McDonald from America.
Right, this gentleman is Dr. John McDonald from America.
Who brings in the little boy in brown face, who says to bring Gappa back to the island. He won't stop screaming Gappa either.
Gappa! 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 Gappa!
But yeah, Gappa the Triphibian monster is pretty good. There are a couple things I don't care for. The reporter character's entire arc is basically just her accepting her role as a housewife.
I've decided to quit my job. I'm just an ordinary woman. I should stay home, marry an office worker, and wash diapers.
Jesus Christ, I can't believe that came back. But other than that and the whole brown face thing, it's a pretty damn good time. I can't find a way to fit this into the script naturally, but there's this part in the English audio track where this little girl starts speaking Japanese. Oops. Not a terribly interesting human cast, but those tokusatsu sequences are just top-notch. Some very endearing monster characterization, too. Watch the widescreen version of the film. But if you feel compelled to, there are a number of special effects scenes exclusive to the American cut that are absent from the Japanese version. Alright, that's enough fun. Back to the public domain.
Gappa! 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 Gappa!
The Monster Maker has everything a 40s B-movie needs. A mad scientist, a man with a deformity they're passing off as a monster, and a guy in a cheap gorilla suit. The mad scientist in question is Dr. Igor Markov, as generic a name as they come. He's a real creep towards this lady, who resembles his dead wife. He injected his old wife with experimental science juice that gave her acromegaly. But rather than thank him for making her ugly, a bit of a problem with that plan, she ended her life instead. After he assaults the new lady's father, Markov injects him with the experimental science juice, and he starts a slow transformation into a lumpy monster. A scheme to coerce his daughter's hand of marriage out of him. Acromegaly is an actual condition, but this movie seems to think it gives you super strength.
You have set yourself up as a Frankenstein and created a monster.
Close enough.
My name, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
Markov's assistant keeps threatening to leave him after learning about all the crazy shit he's doing, but she acts like she's seeing him do it for the first time, as if it wasn't completely obvious that this man is not worth sticking around for.
You have never meant anything more, and you never shall. Keep that in mind.
He's the type of guy to send a gorilla after you if you misbehave. This movie sounds crazy, but honestly it's a bit of a letdown. Not a lot of action here, and the sluggish pacing isn't in service of a suspenseful film. Not very good. On to the next movie.
The dead have no place among the living.
I shall be the judge of that.
The Monster Walks. Out of the 4 gorilla movies on this collection, this is the first one to feature an actual, real, breathing ape. A chimpanzee. Chimp Bros, where are you at? Anyways, there's a guy with a monkey arm running around or something. Not gonna lie, couldn't get into this one. It's just not particularly engaging. It's one of those early 30s movies where they were still working with sound, so the performances are a little too theatrical, but the lack of music does add to the tension. It is pretty scary for the characters to be talking only to get interrupted by chimp screaming.
Lifeless limbs.
That's kind of all there is to it. Time for the next movie, and let me tell you, it's a doozy.
Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead is a very influential 1968 horror film. While not the first to feature what we would consider zombies, it is easily one of the most influential. If it were not for this botched title sequence where they forgot the copyright, we would not have the zombie genre as we know it. The film starts with Barbara and her brother Johnny going to a graveyard to pay respects to their dead father. After Barb is attacked by a strange man, Johnny is killed in the scuffle. Barbara is chased out to a farmhouse, and this will be the primary location for the rest of the film. There she meets a man named Ben, who quickly takes charge of the situation and starts building a line of defense against even more of these mysterious attackers. Eventually, it's discovered a family has been hiding away in the basement the whole time, and tensions rise between Ben and the family dad, Harry.
Well, you're her father. If you're stupid enough to go die in that trap, that's your business. However, I am not stupid enough to follow you.
Through radio and television, it's eventually revealed that these mysterious, lurching attackers are actually the living dead, ghouls as they're called, and they have an appetite that can only be satisfied by human flesh. They're afraid of fire, and a blunt force to the head will put them down for good, but neither of these are enough when there's a whole field of them. As hard as it is, the inhabitants of the house have to work together if they hope to survive the night of the living dead. Having Ben prepare as exposition is delivered via radio is a great way of conveying the direness of the situation, while revealing more about the characters as they listen to it, how they carry themselves while hearing this information.
Tell the people, for God's sake, to get off the streets. Tell them to go home and lock their doors and windows up tight. We don't know what kind of murder-happy characters we have here.
The canted angles, the makeup, the rawness of the TV footage achieved through the shaky handheld, the imagery of the zombies approaching the house in this harsh, heavily contrasted black and white cinematography, the unfair ending. It all contributes to a bleak atmosphere where you dread every development.
I'd drag you out there and feed you those things!
These zombies aren't entirely brain dead either, no. They're capable of using tools to break down a line of defense between them and tasty flesh. Because of Living Dead's status as public domain and wider availability, I first saw this movie at a young age, and it scared me in a way most movies hadn't. This is not the feel-good movie of 1968, and for that, you need to be in the right mood to watch it. Of George Romero's Living Dead movies, I think Dawn of the Dead is still my favorite. It's good, but for different reasons. It's a lot more lighthearted and has a fun setting. But the original film still stands as a harrowing movie. Easily one of the best movies of this box set. Put it on for Halloween, for some real chills.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it!
Nightmare Castle is another Italian movie. Its original title being... here we go. Amanti d'Oltrebomo. Golly, I wonder how hard English is for non-English speaking people. A sadistic count kills his unfaithful wife and her lover with a seizure blast. Then he marries another woman many years later, a mentally unstable one at that, and he plans to yoink her fortune from her, once she goes crazy from staying at his spooky castle. Naturally, the lovers he killed didn't like getting offed with seizure blasts, so they return as vengeful spirits and scare him and his new wife. And this manifests in the form of tormenting the wife with the nightmares of early 2010's creepypasta monsters, and also possessing her to attack her ex-husband. Unrelated to all this, but the Count is also a mad scientist. I didn't know how to include this in the plot summary because it's kind of a superfluous element. There's a scene where he kills someone by electrocuting a bath. I'm goofing around with this synopsis, but the film is actually trying to be sophisticated, and despite its exploitation presentation, it succeeds in being a little spooky. One of the first notes for this was how good the score was, and sure enough, it was composed by Ennio Morricone. Pre-Dollars trilogy. Barbara Steele also plays two characters here. Also, she's very pretty. That's it. That's all I've got. It's another dubbed Italian movie. It's fine. Not particularly impressed, but it's above average. The second movie of this video, over 100 years old, Jesus Christ, everyone in this movie is dead. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, is a very early unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was almost lost to time when Bram Stoker's estate sued for plagiarism, but it has survived into the modern day through the public domain and restorations. The film follows Hutter, Jonathan Harker's stand-in, who travels to Transylvania to make arrangements for housing for one Count Orlok, Count Dracula's stand-in. Orlok is a strange host. He sleeps during the day and takes an interest in a wound Hutter has when he accidentally cuts himself, and that's because he is Nosferatu, a vampire. Knowing Orlok's housing is right next to his, and that his darling Ellen, Mina's stand-in, may be in danger, he races back to town before Orlok can get there and begin his reign of terror. Nosferatu is the silent horror classic, propped up by Max Schreck's memorable portrayal of Count Orlok, and the many iconic shots he is placed in. Schreck's performance here is so good that he blends right into the role. He's creepy, he's imposing, his body movements are purposefully unnatural. It's a fantastic performance and an iconic look for a monster. The supporting cast isn't as good, but they've got some memorable moments too. Knock, Renfield's stand-in, is absolutely bouncing off the walls with energy. He's great. Other elements of this movie are kinda so-so. For some reason, they depict a werewolf with a spotted African dog or a hyena. It's a very strange inclusion, but it's not a huge part of the movie. The film has an iconic look to it, just this perfect fusion of German expressionist imagery and believable lived-in environments. It's wild we almost lost this movie due to copyright law. Save your tapes, people. Save your tapes. This goes without saying for all these, but if you watch one of these silent movies, make sure to watch the proper restored versions. These cheapo public domain versions are usually terrible. This one in particular, found on the Mill Creek collection, has an obnoxious discordant organ score that plays throughout the entire film. And it doesn't tint any of the scenes, so night sequences lack the proper purple or blue filter. Awful version. Watch the Kino Lorber restoration instead. Anyways, I watched the Mill Creek version with friends, so here's a highlight reel of that.
Oh, yo, okay, so using this we can understand that Jonathan's a bishop, because he can only move on the diagonal squares.
No, he could be a queen.
He could be a queen. He could be a queen?
I have had some frightful dreams, but they were only dreams. I am leaving immediately to return to Banana, and to you.
Does Nosferatu take daytime or nighttime NyQuil when he goes to sleep?
Welcome to Film Theory.
I am obsessed with the idea of Dracula writing over the label of his Dayquil and NyQuil with Sharpie so he doesn't get confused.
Another horror comedy, this time from Paramount. One Body Too Many stars Jack Haley, best known as the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. He plays an insurance salesman who gets caught up in a rich family's convoluted inheritance plot. See, their dead uncle is supposed to leave behind an inheritance for the family as long as they stay inside an old dark house. But the salesman is mistaken for a detective sent to guard the uncle's body, and a girl he likes is the next target of the mysterious killer. Bela Lugosi plays another butler in this one, and he has a funny line or two.
What, rain? The rain that's falling down, sir.
So if you want, you could consider this a spiritual sequel to The Gorilla. It's a comedic spin on the old dark house subgenre, where characters spend the night at a haunted house, where spooky things happen. There's more to the filmmaking in this one. It's not a cheapo monogram movie where everything is shot at flat angles. It feels like a proper movie. Due to the transfer, a lot of scenes are maybe a little too dark. And not just because it's a dark house movie. What is this, the 2014 Godzilla movie? A lot of jokes are pretty hit.
For that very moment, the murderer lurking behind him was preparing to kill the famous detective in cold blood.
Ah, trash. Things like that don't happen.
Or miss.
Venus approaching Jupiter.
It must be very interesting for Jupiter.
But Jack Haley is a very likable actor. There's this soft-spoken way he speaks that's very comforting.
You know, the precarious one.
Don't tell me you're falling for that hooey.
You can't tell. There may be something to it after all.
If you enjoyed The Gorilla, then you might like this one too. It's alright.
Oh, there you are. Oh, I can't tell a dead man insurance.
Phantom from 10,000 Leagues. A fish monster kills a man in the cold open, whose body is found on a beach by a biologist and a government agent.
I want you to forget that you're even here tonight, understand?
My good sir, it's the middle of the day. The monster was created by a mad scientist. A really mad scientist.
She's a sneaking, prying female. I should fire her.
Cripes, dude. Too much. He created the monster using a radioactive rock. There is a thrilling romance going on between the biologist and the mad scientist's daughter, and sometimes the monster shows up. The movie's all like, "What you're doing in the realm of science to science this science," and the evil scientist is like, "It's none of your business, science." And it tries to build tension and intrigue, but we already know there's a monster and we already know who made it. There's an attempt at mystery, but we already know the answer right out the gate. It's not like Columbo where we're introduced to a killer and the rest of the episode is about unraveling their alibi. There's no fun structure like that.
Ah, one more thing.
This is like Creature from the Black Lagoon on sedatives. It provides very little in terms of entertainment or even good characters. The monster looks like crap too. But it's an enjoyable shot of adrenaline into this corpse of a movie, on the rare occasion it shows up. The message at the end is nonsensical too.
Nature has many secrets that man mustn't disturb. And this was one of them.
Nature had nothing to do with this, it was all man-made. As weak as the Creature from the Black Lagoon sequels were, they knew when to inject monster action to spice things up. This movie has a lot of guys in suits talking, shots of man-asses swimming underwater, and it ends on a low-budget oxygen destroyer, where the mad scientist plans to use dynamite to kill his creation. Leagues is leagues more awkward and sluggish. This movie sucks. Next one.
Kind of narrows the field down, doesn't it? Yes, it seems so.
Speaking of narrowing things down, we've got 10 movies left. Thanks for making it this far, I really appreciate it. This has been a very long journey, but we're in the home stretch. Thank you. In 1910, French author Gaston Leroux released a novel entitled The Phantom of the Opera. 15 years later, an American film adaptation was released, starring Lon Chaney Sr. in the title role. Set in an opera house in Paris, there have been many eyewitness reports of a mysterious man attending performances and living in the opera house, dubbed the Phantom. It turns out the Phantom is real, and he demands that a woman named Christine take the center role in an upcoming opera. His demands are ignored, and another woman takes the stage instead, which he answers in kind by dropping a chandelier on the audience. The Phantom doesn't mess around. Despite this, Christine is still drawn to the Phantom, and he leads her underground to profess his love to her, which she doesn't take too well. In fairness, he did just drop a chandelier on a bunch of people. It turns out his name is Eric, and he has been living in the catacombs below the opera house for years, wearing a mask to hide his hideous deformity. Christine wastes no time unmasking him, and boy, this reveal is a doozy. Yes, this is the guy on the box set cover. It took this long to get to him, and the wait was worth it. Lon Chaney's Phantom is utterly fantastic, the pinnacle of silent film horror acting. His makeup is ghoulish, his voiceless performance reads as effectively commanding and intimidating. He's an overly controlling monster of a character, and that is conveyed strongly in his performance. It's silent acting up there with Max Schreck's Count Orlok. The other performances are very strong too, it's just an overall solid cast. Nosferatu is what I would consider more as the face of silent horror, but Phantom of the Opera is a very worthy contender, and it might just be a little better. It definitely has a more extravagant budget, flexing with its massive sets and fancy costumes. There's this ball sequence halfway through the film that is rendered in mostly full color. It must have taken so much time and energy to get this to look as good as it does. It's really cool. Phantom of the Opera is a very good movie. The best silent movie of this collection. The plot moves along at a suspenseful pacing and it keeps me engaged. There's rarely a dull moment in this movie. Highly recommended. The most interesting thing Revolt of the Zombies has going for it is that it was allegedly going to be a sequel to White Zombie. Bela Lugosi's eyes even appear. Other than that, it's... oh my god, this is rough. Set during World War I, zombies are used for combat. That sounds like an interesting premise, right? Well, no, this is only relevant for one scene in the movie. The rest has them doing manual slave labor in an overtly offensive way. I mean, all of these zombies are non-white actors. It has negative connotations. The film is actually about an all-white cast and a crappy love triangle. There are barely any zombies in this too. The film's scariness hinges on whether or not you think an outdated American view of Asia is spooky. It doesn't suck because of the racism. It's just bad on its own merits, on top of the racism. Horrendous flick, unengaging cinematography, really boring, really slow. It sucks pee-pee dick. Next. I'm going to try to not quote the Cinemassacre review of this, because it happens to be my favorite episode of Monster Madness.
Help! It's the Screaming Skull!
Screaming Skull is a delightfully silly palate cleanser. It opens with a guarantee from the producers that a free burial service will be provided to anyone who dies from fright of watching the movie.
Its producers feel they must assure free burial services to anyone who dies of fright while seeing The Screaming Skull.
It sets the mood perfectly for a film as hastily constructed as this one. Do you think anyone tried to capitalize on that offer? Even if they died before they could, I mean, a bit of a problem with that plan to begin with. I don't think they have a strong enough case because this movie is so bad. So the plot of Screaming Skull follows newlyweds Jenny and Eric arriving at a country home for a honeymoon. It's revealed Eric's previous wife died from slipping on a leaf and hitting her head on the rocks near the pond.
Perhaps she slipped on a leaf, hit her head on the edge of the cement wall where we're sitting,
which smashed her skull on impact.
The base of her skull was smashed.
So Eric has pictures of her around the house. You know, a very normal thing to do for your new wife. Though in fairness, it was probably the gardener Mickey who put those there, who has a connection with the old wife, and he's the resident red herring for the following events. The old wife happens to look exactly like Jenny's mother too, who died in a drowning accident.
She was very beautiful. Very gay.
How this plays into the plot, I'm not sure. The movie seems intent on being needlessly convoluted, and it doesn't build towards anything that connects all these threads satisfactorily. At night, Jenny has spooky encounters with the ghost of Eric's ex-wife, a disembodied skull. Spoilers for the screaming skull, but it's Eric who's placing the skull around the house. For nebulous reasons at that. More spooky gaslighting, I guess.
There's no skull there, darling. There is no skull there, Jenny.
Apparently it was for her money that she apparently had.
Why did he do it?
Your money.
Yet it's revealed that the ghost of his ex-wife is real and is coming after him. And it also happens to be a disembodied skull. What's more confusing, if the skull was smashed in like they said, why is this one perfectly intact? It'd be a spooky visual to have a cracked skull wandering around, sure, but whatever. It's the fact that it's a skull, too. One that's rolling around and flying through the air making car screeching noises. It's just laughable. For a plot as poorly conceived as this one, the film does have its own merits. It's got some good cinematography from Academy Award winner Floyd Crosby. It's not super extravagant, but it does the job with its slow trucking and panning. The film has some spooky, haunting shots as a result, but it's all destroyed by how convoluted the story is. It's so bad, but it's so good. Watch this one with friends. A Shriek in the Night is another early sound film. A Shriek in the Night is the inciting incident. Pretty attention-grabbing opening.
Somebody is a little drunk.
Unfortunately, the movie doesn't do much to hold my attention. By being an early sound film, you feel every second because of the deafening white noise.
She's trying to remember her lines.
Yeah, you could probably
read
use
them.
It's shot like a stage play, and you know how I feel about B-movies shot like that. The blocking is just the characters all wandering around like it's a stage production. Anyways, Humble Squid showed me Mr. Boop, and I read that instead of actually paying attention. Funny webcomic. Anyways, on to the next movie. I'm not sure why this is in the horror movie collection.
I like that even though you have it, like, it's probably 1.5 times speed. There are still these, like, really pregnant pauses, and I can't imagine watching it on normal speed, because even on this sped up thing, I'm like, this is excessive.
Right off the bat, I want to say Swamp Women is a ripoff. There are women in swamps, but there are no swamp women. Where are the mud monster women? Cowards. I'm not interested in this non-mud womanless crap. They should have called this Bio Bitches. I'm sorry, that was mean. Anyways, the film is about a bunch of escaped women convicts who are looking for diamonds in the Louisiana swamp. They kidnap this couple in the middle of their search.
You better tie you up again.
It's getting to feel natural.
It also turns into a shitty harem anime, when the guy's girlfriend dies and the prison women vie for his attention. There is no character development, very little plot progression. All they do is bicker at each other. It's a slog, which I guess is appropriate because it's in a swamp. The film stumbles through these scenes with very little grace and it ends abruptly. Yep, it's an early Roger Corman movie. It barely counts as a horror movie. There are horror elements, like a scene where a alligator and snake attack. The snake attack suddenly makes the film turn piss yellow. That's kind of scary. Why does it look like this?
I guess they ran out of the reels and had to use this bootleg. You've entered the piss zone. Never mind.
Anyways, this movie's fucking bad. Don't watch it.
Why the fuck is he in here?
What happened to the film? What was
that
that?
was fine.
Honestly, if we went in alphabetical order, we'd have a pretty weak conclusion, so I'll be saving the terror for later, so I have something interesting to talk about for the final film. Trust me, it'll be worth the wait. This film is something else. Finally, a real horror movie. Tormented is a film from 1960, directed by Burt I. Gordon, whose initials are B.I.G., and that's because he made movies about giants. Giant monsters. Tormented, however, is not about giant monsters. Why didn't I just do the science fiction box set? The film opens on a pretty snazzy intro song. The main character, Tom Stewart, is a jazz musician, so it's thematically fitting. And so is the rest of the score. Tom is engaged to another woman. but an ex shows up and tries to blackmail him into leaving her. Their spat leads to the top of a lighthouse, where she falls to her death. Tom is now wrecked with guilt for not saving her, and for the remainder of the film, he encounters a number of spooky occurrences, and they may not just be psychological. He's tormented. Bazinga! Tormented straddles the line between genuinely decent and so bad it's good, just so hard. So I'm going to meet it halfway and call it enjoyably cheesy. The filmmaking here is pretty solid, which is rare for a director of schlock like B.I.G. There are some bumps in the pacing though. There's this character who tries to blackmail Tom, and his scenes are kind of a drag. One thing with the script that I don't care for is that it doesn't know how to treat Tom as a character, whether he's an asshole who's willing to kill to avoid a smear on his reputation, or someone who genuinely cares about people he loves. He's pushed into killing by the ghost lady, but he still makes the choice to do so. At the end, spoilers, he's willing to even kill a child because she heard him kill the last guy. He's a bit disturbed, yeah, but his downfall is handled clumsily. The child acting is pretty decent. The supporting cast is pretty decent too. This is a film defined by really funny moments, like when the head of the girl appears to Tom, so he wraps it up to keep her from talking. The muffled speaking is what makes it. This film knows how to use its score, diegetic and non-diegetic, to punctuate moments for effect.
I still have your letters. Murder?
It's good, cheesy fun. Highly recommended with a group to riff on it.
What do you want?
The Vampire Bat. Our single V movie on the list. Ooh. It's another early sound film from the 30s, but this one is actually pretty alright. A mysterious entity is going around committing murders in a small village, and a police inspector, played by Melvin Douglas, is tasked with getting to the bottom of it. He doesn't believe in the supernatural, and his way of expressing this disbelief is pretty peculiar.
From their graves in the dead of night to attack their victims and drink the blood from their veins.
Lionel Atwill also plays a doctor who is up to some spooky things. Dwight Fry plays another crazy man, and Fay Wray, Anne from King Kong, also stars in this. The Vampire Bat is a perfectly watchable film.
I'm a doomed man! He'll kill me! He'll kill me! I'm doomed! He'll kill me! He'll kill me! I'm a doomed man! He'll kill me!
It's got some strange moments though. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a little comedic, but without accompanying music, so many of these moments read as awkward more so than funny. The filmmaking is functional, but not all too impressive. We got some decent camera movements, and the film can be successfully eerie without musical accompaniment. Perfectly watchable, but it's not a must-see.
Are your kisses dynamite?
White Zombie is a film I have mixed feelings about. A fiancé and his bride travel to a plantation to get married, which is something that bothers the owner. The owner then asks the resident voodoo hypnotist, played by Bela Lugosi, to use his voodoo powers to turn the bride into a zombie to get her to fall in love with him. But it starts to go horribly wrong. He does start to have second thoughts about it, especially when he himself starts to turn into a zombie. This is a film that moves at an incredibly slow pace. Some would call it glacial, zombie-like even. And while it's not what I would consider great, the slow pacing at least feels purposeful here, rather than a way of filling time as the B-side of a double feature. It's slow because it's building an atmosphere, a surreal atmosphere where Bela Lugosi's eyes travel around the screen. The lack of music is less of a restriction and more of a cinematic tool. So when there is a musical score, it is natural, diegetic within the film, further adding to the ambiance. Isolated sounds like the creaking of the mill adds to the ambiance too. The film does have non-diegetic music too, but it is used sparingly. The way Bela Lugosi just stares into the camera is mesmerizing. He has this imposing presence that can be felt even when he's not on screen. The other actors, not so much.
I'd give my life to make you happy.
There are some nice sets and matte paintings here. This film does have production value. There are a couple strange choices though, like the decision to have the scene transition happen after holding on this guy's butt. What, is there a portal to the next scene in there? I'd kill to know who voiced that bird though. He sounds like he's having a fun time. Some pretty hokey dialogue by today's standards too.
She must be gay and happy again.
In the old times, gay used to mean happy, so like, is he saying she should be happy and happy? Or did he mean something else?
I have taken a fancy to you, monsieur.
I'm ribbing this movie, but it is a cult classic for a reason. It has a number of things going for it, but it's a little too slow for my liking. I feel as though, given time, it's something I can learn to appreciate.
Zombies. Yes.
The World Gone Mad is another early sound film from the 30s. It is a crime drama. Not a horror film, but a crime drama. The Terror is a 1963 horror film directed by Roger Corman. In a couple ways, it feels like a culmination of this entire review series. It features a handful of artists we've seen so far. We've got Floyd Crosby from The Screaming Skull doing uncredited camera work. Jack Nicholson, who earlier appeared in Little Shop of Horrors, also stars in this movie, and was one of the 6 credited directors. We've got Stuart Bryan from Dementia 13 doing editing. Speaking of Dementia 13, Francis Ford Coppola is allegedly one of the 6 people credited with directing the movie. B-movie actor Dick Miller, also from Little Shop of Horrors, also returns. Not to mention Boris Karloff headlines, and of course, the man behind it all, the producer, is Roger Corman. The film started life as a quick production. You know, just something to put Boris Karloff in while they still had them. Karloff's scenes were shot in 2 days, and the rest of the movie languished in production hell for 9 months. I'm pretty sure they didn't really have a story planned for this. So, what is the plot of The Terror? I'm glad you asked. It opens with a scene featuring Boris Karloff as a baron, opening a door only to be greeted by a skeleton. This is never mentioned again. We are then introduced to Jack Nicholson's character, a lost French soldier named Andre, who is led to a spooky castle by a mysterious disappearing woman. He travels to the castle and meets the baron, who tells him the woman was his baroness and died 20 years ago. Her death is the subject of mystery, and Andre really wants to know her deal, so he corners everyone in the castle for questions.
Then this became her tomb? Why did you remove the portrait of the Baroness from the wall? Now, what happened to the Baroness? Was her death violent?
Yes, her death was violent.
The ghost, Ilsa, has been hypnotized to haunt the Baron by a peasant. So then Andre leaves the castle and finds the man who sent him in that direction, getting his eyes pecked out by a bird. In his dying breath, he tells Andre to protect the ghost of the Baroness. It turns out the Baron isn't the Baron, but a man named Eric who took the Baron's place after killing him, staying in the castle for 20 years to atone for his guilt, slowly convincing himself he is the Baron. It turns out the peasant woman who's commanding the ghost to torment him is Eric's mother, who still thinks the Baron killed Eric, even though the Baron is Eric. Got all that?
She's used the girl as a puppet to drive the Baron to suicide.
I will say it is impressive how the plot for this movie manages to remain comprehensible, but you can practically see the cheap glue holding it all together.
Baron, you mustn't go down!
And it creeps along at an obnoxiously slow pace, made up of scenes of characters just wandering around the castle. It doesn't help that the script is a confusing cluster truck of ye olde speak, and it comes off as very stilted.
I am possessed of the dead.
You're a warm, living woman. Who has told you these things?
The dead.
Jack Nicholson doesn't bring his A game here. This was one of his earlier movies, so I can't be too hard on him, but he was great in The Little Shop of Horrors, so it's less excusable. With dialogue like this, I can't really blame him for being so wooden, though.
You seem to have things strangely confused in your mind.
The fact that we even got a movie at all is a miracle, with how haphazardly produced the whole thing feels. It can be somewhat entertaining at points. The peasant woman character is conveniently removed from the movie in an amusing way. She holds a metal fence and it's struck by lightning, just out of nowhere. Because they didn't know how to end her role in the movie. Schlocky stuff like that is great, but most of the film is people wandering around in dark rooms. That's never fun. The film's marketing poses the question, who is the Terror? I've seen the movie, and I'd like to know too.
There are certain other mysteries I would like to have explained, Baron, and I mean to have them explained.
This collection sucks. A lot of movies here aren't even horror movies. I mean, I already know a couple public domain movies that would make for better inclusions here. Come on, Black Dragons, really? Over the Devil Bat? There are other Mill Creek box sets that have more appropriate choices, but this one has a lot of just baffling ones. But yeah, I hope this video proves that you shouldn't always write off a film for being bad just because it's in the public domain. There will always be a diamond in the rough.
Well, I guess there's just no accounting for people's tastes.
Wow, it's been a hot minute since I've looked at this video project. Yeah, this was the first big video review thing I did. It was way back in summer of 2022. It feels like forever ago since I started doing YouTube more regularly. But yeah, thank you so much for making it to the end, and here are my current patrons at the time of this recording. Waba, Alcoholic Alligators, Ryan Santa Cruz, Avak Robot, Dante Infante, Ziggy Zigra, It's Good Z, Bigodilo, An Actual Dimetrodon, CMG, Red Comet Harry, and Marpzilla. Thank you very much.